Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. It's your boy, the Conor McGregor of Patreon beggars, Jack Slack, and this is the Fights Gone By podcast, episode 29. We're coming up on a huge event, so we're going to jump in with the recaps, and then we'll go straight into the event, and then we'll do some questions. And then maybe we'll talk about the upcoming Bellator at the end, or something like that. Not an awful lot of stuff happened this past weekend. Bellator 173 and Glory 38. I think that was in Chicago, Glory, I can't remember. Oh, Bellator was in Northern Ireland, Belfast. And they rolled into town, Bellator this is, with a load of Straight Blast Gym guys and Liam McGeary. Liam McGeary had his opponent swapped twice, so they were trying to get him back on the winning track with a fairly soft opponent to begin with, but then he got switched twice, which is always very dangerous. So props to McGeary for going ahead with that. His opponent, Brett McDermott, Dermot O'Leary, Dermot something or other. Not a very accomplished fighter, just someone they brought in at the last minute. And if you saw the fight, McGeary's jab was the story of the fight, both positively and negatively. It got him dropped in the very early going, because McGeary is a 6'6" light heavyweight. He has a height and length. Well, remember that height is part of range, not just reach. So he has a range advantage on most of the people he's fighting in terms of jabbing. So what he was doing was jabbing with his right hand down by his side a lot. Bit like prime Muhammad Ali. And like Muhammad Ali, he got pulled up on it by his opponent, seemingly by accident at first. This wasn't like Kenny Norton systematically jabbing with Muhammad Ali for however many rounds and breaking his jaw. This was a one-off punch, but classical form on the jab. You jab with your lead hand, you get your lead shoulder nice and high, your rear hand comes up palm open towards your center line to palm the opponent's jab. It's one of those things where, well, in the modern era, especially in kickboxing, things like that, a lot of guys teach you jab with the non-punching hand nailed to the side of the head in your standard fists up guard. But typically, if you're jabbing, you want to be right on the end of your reach, and the thing most likely to be coming back, and the thing that will be hardest to react to, is the straight punch with the lead hand straight down the center, so you have that rear hand up ready to palm it. It's one of those things where you play what's the most likely reaction and what will I most likely to be able to react to if he does something different. You're going to have an easier time having your hand in and bringing it out if you see him swinging wide for a very long left hook than having your hand up for a left hook that probably won't come in answer to your jab, but having to try and bring it in and parry the shorter, straighter punch. So McGeary's right hand was all over the place. A jab on the snout in the first round, dropped on his arse, immediately tried to stand up in the, I've fallen over, hope no one saw that sort of way. Both hands on the floor, dragged his butt back, brought his heels in underneath him, tried to stand up, both feet under him. And McDermott, or whatever his name was, immediately ran in, and McGeary jumped backwards onto his back again, going, oops, shouldn't have done that. Next time he stood up, he did it with a proper technical stand-up, standing up in base. Technical stand-up / standing up in base, something you learned day one in BJJ, and whenever anyone asks me, like, from a stand-up background, what things, if you had to boil it down to what you really need to learn from BJJ, aside from saying go try it because it's awesome fun, I always say standing up in base is like the most important thing, because it could conceivably save your life at some point. There's no way to do it completely safely, because it's there's flaws in the actual technical stand-up itself. There's loads of guys been knocked out being timed getting up from the floor. Musashi knocked some guy down the other month. Basically, once that posting hand leaves the floor, it's got a long time coming up to the chin, so you've got to try and time your high kicks when they're doing that, or your leaping hooks or whatever. But it does beat coming up with feet level, body square on, no guard, because both your hands have been on the floor. And the technical stand-up gives you options. McGeary had to leap backwards to get away from his man, but if you're doing a stand-up in base, you get your feet in the right place, you can drop underneath the opponent as they rush in on you in an attempt to take down. Or you can jump back to your back. You got choices because you're in a stance or you're moving into a stance. You're not coming up with your feet level. Small points, both of those, but they did cost McGeary almost the fight in what would have been an embarrassing fashion. But he got back to it and jabbed his man up, smashed his face wide open, hit him with a nice counter knee and dropped him. And the fight was waved off due to cuts, and the guy who was supposed to win won. Elsewhere on the card, not an awful lot of interesting stuff. Sinead Kavanagh, talented amateur boxer, I believe she was, from the Straight Blast Gym Ireland crew. 4-0, putting against some lass who's 1-1, and hasn't fought since 2015. So you can tell what they were going for there. You know, even though Belfast is Northern Ireland and Straight Blast Gym is from the Republic of Ireland, you know, there was definitely a sort of hometown favourite supposed to be winning there. But she didn't. She lost. She got held down for 3 fairly uneventful rounds. Very long, wide stance. Looked very... Well, it just put a lot of distance between her right-hander and her opponent, and it also made it hard for her to sprawl on takedowns. But equally, James Gallagher used a nice long stance, very narrow in his fight against the guy who was supposed to lose to him, and won the fight. Well, I mean, lots of people talking about how sharp his striking looked. Didn't really connect anything useful, but he looked, you know, economical and sharp and quick. Yeah, you know, we're getting into that situation with him where they're putting him in the co-main event routinely, and then people are saying, "Oh, come on, he's a prospect. He doesn't need to fight anyone good yet." And then you're like, "Well, why are they putting him in the co-main event? Why are they eating up a spot in what should be an important fight, giving him jobbers to beat?" You know, I'm quite excited for his future because he's such a slick grappler and his striking is coming along. But equally, I don't want to see him in the Michael Venom Page boat where we keep thinking he's going to get someone like handy to try himself against. And what was going to be a Paul Daly match, it was totally almost signed, guys. What was going to be a Paul Daly match suddenly became a match against a lightweight coming off a loss. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, Scott Coker just can't build prospects for the life of him, it seems. Or just wants them to keep finishing opponents. But then that's how he marketed Nick Diaz. He didn't put him in with the hardest matchups, you know. Steered him clear of wrestlers for about 5 years. But because Diaz beat so many guys and finished so many guys back to back to back, people were convinced that he was the second best welterweight in the world, or some people even thought he was better than George St. Pierre. Fuck all else really interesting happened on that Bellator card. Glory, much the same, you know, not a lot of big names on there, not a lot of interesting fights or finishes. Cavallari, whoever, the guy who beat Zach Mukasa against that Russian dude in the main event. Good knockout, but not really like a story to tell of it being set up and paying off. Groenhart versus Thongchai. That was a decent fight. Ugly scrap, but it was one of those ones where it made you really angry about the rules in kickboxing, because I don't want to sound like one of those Thai elitists. It gets so fucking old when people are like, "Oh, well, the Dutch kickboxers are scared of the Thais because they can't fight in the clinch like real men." And then you're like, well, the Thais can't fight once they get past the clinch. They can't fight on the ground. It's you build up, you put your own parameters in for your sport. Nobody really, like, if you want to see a fight, watch MMA. Like, you know, don't pretend that Muay Thai is like the be all and end all of fighting because they allow the clinch, but don't allow you to follow the guys to the ground. I'm sure there's a very small forum of Thai guys or Muay Thai fans angry about me saying that. But yeah, this one was one where I would have liked to see them let them work in the clinch longer, because Groenhart a lot of the time wasn't doing anything to stop Thongchai in the clinch. So what was happening was he was eating knees, and the reason that they don't allow the clinch in kickboxing is because it's supposed to be a more exciting sport, and prolonged, evenly matched clinches end up being quite boring and remove the chance of a knockout a lot of the time. But if one guy can't stop the other guy kneeing, that's not really like why you banned the clinch. You banned the clinch because it was to make it more exciting. So would like to see a little bit more work done there. And then Thongchai seemed almost angered by the fact that the ref was telling him off for holding and kneeing, and then went to exclusively holding and kneeing. And then he wasn't, like, his hands were going forward as if to check his opponent's hands and move into the clinch, but he really was just reaching for Groenhart's head, because Groenhart was firing these right hands and they were coming in from everywhere. Long and sloppy as hell, but he was catching Thongchai clean almost all the time. Kept trying to throw his right hand and weave out to his right side. Really like that. But a lot of it was just sloppy, and then in the third round, Thongchai was knackered, and Groenhart put in a nice 3-punch combination, sunk one into the liver, and then followed up with long combinations, 4 or 5 left hooks off the same side in the row, and then you know, Groenhart knee, and then the more left hooks. Really ugly fight. But, you know, sort of what I needed on this weekend when nothing was happening. So if you missed out on any of those fights, you didn't miss out on much. Whereas this weekend, we've got UFC 209, and that's going to be a good one, hopefully. Certainly got name power. You got the rematch between Stephen Thompson and Tyron Woodley. Their first match was crackerjack, but kind of overshadowed because it was UFC 205. Obviously, the McGregor Alvarez match was after that. Yeah, really good fight. I love that one. The bit that really, there were a lot of lessons to take home about that fight, but one that really stood out to me was like, it's always the elbow that doesn't look like much that will cut the guy open. I think it was Woodley was moving from Thompson's half guard, and he'd got like his ankle caught on the way to the side control, and Thompson off balances him, and while Woodley's falling to the other side, he drops a short elbow, no weight behind it, cuts the guy open, and that's the one that did it, not the ones that he was dropping in with full force onto Thompson's head before that. Yeah, just interesting. Really liked Thompson's work with the rear straights, both from left and right stance along the fence. Fence is a great place to start throwing the long straight shots to the body because the guys tend to square up a bit more along the fence. They can't retreat, and it's a lot harder to move your body than move your head out of the way of blows. I think if he'd gone to those more, actually, he would have had more success. Everyone talks about Tyron Woodley's gas tank, which is racist if you ask him. But it's one thing to question the guy's gas tank, but if you're not going to do anything to make that an issue, you're just relying on, I don't know, your words hurting him into tiredness. Thompson didn't look quite as comfortable kicking as he did against guys like Johnny Hendricks. I think because in that first round he threw, I think it was a low kick, which seemed out of character because he does a lot of... Well, actually, I would love to see Thompson using the low line side kick more. You see guys like Ryan Hall and people like that picking it up, but Thompson seems to be one of those guys who has an issue with throwing straight kicks to the knee or something like that. Some guys just don't like doing it because it is a gnarly injury to think about. That whole "that's a dirty kick" thing exists in MMA too. It's not just Rampage Jackson whining about a loss. But equally, I think he could really benefit from throwing that out there because it's so hard to catch compared to a round kick to the leg. First low round kick he threw against Woodley in their first fight, immediately snatched up and taken down. And that's when Woodley was able to hold him on the ground, keep him down there and hurt him. I think in the rematch, I probably want to see more wrestling from Woodley because he did so well in the first fight with that. Obviously, if he gets his man hurt, don't go for the guillotine because he went for that guillotine, almost killed Thompson with it, and then ended up underneath him. And he gave Thompson all that time to recover. I think definitely if he hurts his man, stay on top of him, hit the body, hit the legs, and look for the finish on the feet. Don't pile on the strikes on the feet. Don't get obsessed with finishing the fight immediately. For Thompson, I think trying to gas his man out, trying to do some attrition damage to the legs. And also the low line side kick and things like that help to set up the high kicks. You're not just going to high kick the guy off the bat, and if you're using the side kick to the body to try and set that stuff up a little bit harder. Those are easier to parry and catch. But that should be a good one. I can't wait to see how both guys have adapted their game plans based on what worked and what didn't in the first fight. Then in the co-main, we got Khabib versus Ferguson. It looks like we're going to get there. It looks like it's not going to be cancelled. I mean, cross your fingers, touch wood. But what is this, the third time it's been booked? Fourth time? I had trouble getting excited because I was like, I know this is just going to fall through again. But it seems to be coming about, and that is such a good fight. Such a good fight. And it comes down to the case where, I know whoever loses this fight is suddenly going to be the hypothetical loser in any matchup with McGregor. If Khabib holds Ferguson down and batters him, no one will take the idea of McGregor versus Ferguson seriously, and vice versa, which is really sad because both these guys are really interesting matchups for Conor McGregor for different reasons. I mean, Ferguson's pace is powerful, and he constantly moves forward, constantly kicking the body, and his snapdowns are gorgeous. You don't see anyone doing that as well as him in MMA. Actually, I don't know if he's got a height advantage on McGregor. I can't remember their actual stats, but he looks very tall in a lot of his fights at lightweight, and that ends up with guys ducking down their heads. And you'll remember that McGregor's head movement got him caught several times with punches while he was leaning against Nate Diaz the first time. So it'd be interesting to see if Ferguson could draw him forwards, get him ducking, and then snap him down. Because Ferguson does a lot of leaning on the back of the guy's head, and Mayweather does that a lot, actually. Forearm across the back of the neck and lean on it when the guy comes in low and make them carry your weight, maybe strain something if you can. But in MMA, obviously, you can snap them down straight into the front headlock, look for your back takes and your Darce chokes, which Ferguson's so good at, and guillotines too. Now, the thing about this one is Ferguson's punching form is loopy as fuck. It's long punches, but arcing, not straight to the target, not really economical, perfect boxing stuff, which could open him up to the takedowns from Khabib, because you got to think Khabib's going to be trying to take him down. He'll throw those leaping left uppercuts and hooks, but we know what he wants to do. He wants to get the guy on the ground, get his hand behind his back and pound him. I expect that the loopy punches could play into that a little bit. Straight shooting seems to trouble Khabib. I mean, you saw Michael Johnson throwing those straight lefts down the centre, and Khabib looked lost for the first 40 seconds or so of that fight. But he's so strong. He shot in, got sprawled on into the front headlock, and just came from his knees, pushed straight up into the clinch along the fence. You can train all the perfect technique in the world, but if you've got a perfect sprawled front headlock position, and the guy can still walk up into you, not an awful lot you can do about that. But then the thing about Ferguson's game that, we always comment on his craziness and willing to roll for legs and shit all the time. Sometimes that's going to be disadvantageous, but against a guy like Khabib who loves the upper body clinch and really likes to get on people's heads when he gets them down, he really likes to climb up and look for mounted crucifixes and things like that. Always knee riding guys' faces and shit. The classic Josh Barnett, Minoru Suzuki stuff. He likes to put a knee across the belly and a knee across the neck, and then as soon as their hand starts pushing off the knee on the neck, he'll bring his knee out, put it inside their hand, and kneel on their arm to get the mounted crucifix. Really nice combination. Hard to drill against training partners without being a total dick to them, but really cool nonetheless. I'm thinking that if Tony Ferguson gives up his back, which he can do from time to time, or gets himself in a body lock or something like that, he might be better off just rolling for the leg, turning it into a leg entanglement game rather than a about to get suplexed game. Just dive for the legs and end up in a better position on the ground than if you'd been thrown there. And we could talk about playing footsie with a Sambo master, but I think in the modern era, the whole Sambo does leg locks, Judo does throws, blah, blah, blah sort of stuff isn't really relevant. You can watch Khabib's fights. He doesn't leg lock a lot of guys. There are a great many better leg lockers out there in the grappling world. And, the leg locking game is becoming, or has become, a more commonly understood positional game than it used to be. Certainly a lot of what makes Khabib so interesting is that he does get into these weird positions like the mounted crucifix and knee on the neck and all those positions with the hand trapped behind the back. He loves to catch that when guys are starting to work their way up along the fit. To be honest, a lot of the more interesting submissions you're seeing nowadays, and a lot of the positions of dominance, real dominance, are acquired as guys try to walk up the fence or put a hand to the mat along the fence. You'll see guys like Phil Davies and Davies and Jacare and people like that. As soon as the hand goes down and the guy starts pushing himself up towards the fence, they'll go for the arm rather than trying to hold the guy down. And that's what got Johnson caught with his hand behind his back a couple of times. As soon as his hand went out to drag him up against the fence, Khabib just snatched it out and seatbelted across the back. I'm getting too excited about this fight. I'm losing my train of thought, but I'll be writing something about it tomorrow, something more in depth. All you need to know is that it should be a good one. The downside is that it's only a 3-rounder, which I think is a fucking travesty for guys of this caliber. If they wanted to last minute put an interim title on this one, I certainly wouldn't be complaining. And it would make the case for McGregor to come back and fight the winner even stronger. What else we got? Rashad Evans versus Daniel Kelly. Weird one. Don't really care. Rashad is in such a strange position because he was a really great fighter. And then he had 3 fights in a row that were designed to be gimmies. Little Nog, who can't deal with the wrestlers, Dan Henderson, who was old and crocked, and Chael Sonnen, who was a middleweight. And he lost one of those, struggled in the other one, and then finally beat Chael Sonnen, and then disappeared for 2 years and was still ranked in the top 5 in light heavyweight the entire time. Yeah, I don't know if he's still got it, but they put him in against sort of like a middling guy, so whatever, don't really care. Lando Venata versus David Tamer. Very excited for that one because Lando is the groovy one. Tamer looked really good in the last fight I saw him in. I can't remember which one that was. Won it by knockout. kept circling out. He's a southpaw, and he kept circling out to his left and throwing the left kick hard into the body and arm, and then he'd shoot the left straight down the centre as the guy was worrying about the left body kick and high kick. Really nice stuff. Be interesting to see how that more sort of simplistic, I suppose, sort of old Crow Cop style plays into or plays out against Lando Venata, who really prefers sort of the he prefers guys who are going to stand and throw at him, because he likes to throw something out, come in behind that weave. He'll throw his right hand, weave, and then throw something else. Hanging about in range was what got Mac Dacey wheel kicked in the face. But it'd be interesting to see how he deals with Tamer circling off to the open side and blasting in that left hand each time. Not a lot to say about that one, just that I'm excited. Overeem versus Mark Hunt. Who's going to get touched on the chin first? Well, you got to think that Overeem's probably going to be trying to work Hunt's body or take him down and batter him on the ground. Overeem made his career as a young man with trips and ground and pound. He's already submitted Mark Hunt once, but that was years ago. Should be a fun one. It's either going to be Econo-Reem, as they call him, circling the cage and kicking lots, or he'll go for a takedown early and try and grind Hunt out or pound him out that way. A couple of other guys worth talking about. Bektik is on the undercard, and also Yuri Alcantara, who looked fantastic in that fight against Brad Pickett. It was the loudest spinning back elbow I'd heard in the UFC, I think. Oh, wait, no, there was that Savage Dong-Hyun Kim one. Anyway, great card of fights. Can't wait to talk about it. Read the Khabib versus Ferguson article tomorrow, and make sure to watch the fights. Right, let's do some questions. Hey Jack, any chance your educated mind has an equally educated opinion about sex before the fights? We all know the old way, but then there are the quote-unquote relaxed fighters like Sugar Ray and Ali who have been known to ignore it and still performed well. Is there any scientific difference? Can you elaborate? Thank you in advance. Big fan of your work. And that's from Shadra. Well, if you're not familiar with the old myth, it's that if you have sex, I think it's something like a week before the fight, 2 weeks before the fight, anytime up to the fight, it saps you of your manly energies or something like that. Some guys tried to make it like scientific and say testosterone. Obviously, there is some testosterone discharged during the act, but I read a scientific study on it at some point, and it basically said like any drop in testosterone is extremely temporary. It's not going to be like, unless you have sex 30 minutes before the fight, you're probably all right on that ground. But equally, I suppose there's value to it because it is, fighting is a very psychological game, and maybe the act of being pent up and frustrated helps. I think it was Marvin Hagler used to say that by the time he got in the ring, he was just sick and wanted to go home. And he was like, that made me angry at the opponent. I wanted to go home and eat the food I like and have sex. You listed Sugar Ray and Muhammad Ali. Weren't they both famously cheats? So I suppose, if you're dealing with the pressure of cheating on your wife at the same time, maybe that keeps you sharp. But again, so much of the fighting game is mental that maybe it could even be a placebo. It could be the need to be frustrated. It could be the actual act of being more relaxed going into the fight. Manny Stewart used to go on and on about Tommy Hearns getting a massage before the Hagler fight, and he insisted that put him off and spent his frustration and left him less mentally sharp. And also his muscles, he said, that it left them weaker or something like that. Again, pseudoscience, but the whole game of fighting is part science and part old wives' tale. And it's one of the, it's like magical realism, like 100 Years of Solitude. It's a nice place where they both meet, and it's probably the only place where they both meet. So I can't say for certain one way or the other, but I do like the speculation over it, and that coaches will happily argue over it. Hi Jack, love your articles and I'm enjoying the podcast. I was wondering if you ever bet on MMA at all. Seems someone with your knowledge could make a decent amount doing so, and if you have any tips, please let us know. Cheers, Aaron. The last bit makes me think you've got a problem. No, I don't. The more time you spend thinking about MMA and studying MMA, the more you realise that a lot of it is a crapshoot. You could pick a guy for all the right reasons and he could win, but for completely different reasons, or he could lose. It's such a random game. I like it that people use my articles to help their betting. Anything you make a more informed decision on is great. To be honest, I only really bet if I have some inside knowledge that's not like fight fixing or anything like that. I'll explain that one in a minute. Or I see a really egregious line that just makes no sense with the matchup. Or I see someone, typically it's if you're seeing someone undervalued. I don't bet on fights that, I only bet on things where I think one guy's being really undersold. I don't bet on things where I think that line's fair. I haven't betted often, but the very worst one I ever made was Gonzaga to beat Couture back in the day. I got caught up in the Gonzaga hype because I watched him head kick Krokop. I was a real pride never, well, it wasn't dead at the time, but I was a real pride boy back in the day. The better bets I've made typically are, again, realizing that the line is egregious or something about the line and the matchup make no sense, or if I personally know the abilities of the guy, and I know the abilities of his opponent very well, and other people don't seem to. I've made 2 really good bets in the same night. I got Mark Hunt at, I think it was 3-1 over Czech Congo. And I was going, Czech Congo has a very bad chin and very bad hands, and he's not going to kick, readily against Mark Hunt. What's he going to do, try and take him down? So I won that one at like 3-1. We're betting pennies, by the way. I don't ever bet real money on this stuff. Real money makes it sound like I've got tons of money. But I don't ever bet, rent money. And the same night, I think it was, Issei Tamura, who is I knew him as like a cast iron lay-in prayer. I'd rolled with him a couple of times before, while I was out in Japan at some point, and he was fighting that guy. You remember the Chinese guy who had really good guillotines and nothing else, and they were desperately trying to get him to win some fights in the UFC so that they could sell him in China? This was during the world fucking domination stage. They were trying to get him over in Macau. But yeah, I knew that guy, all he had was guillotines. I knew that I had a passable guillotine, and I knew that Issei Tamura laid all over me. So I was like, well, what's this guy going to do? So I bet on it for all the right reasons. I think it was 2-1 I got him at. And Tamura knocked him out. First knockout of Tamura's career. So, you bet on it for all the right reasons, and then something completely fucking different happens. So that fight put me off betting more than anything else. Trying to think of recently. I made some money on Nate Diaz against Conor McGregor the very first time, because I knew that Nate Diaz was being undervalued. A last-minute replacement is always dangerous. That's something that is consistently undervalued by fight fans. They think that some jobber coming in at the last minute has a worse chance than some world-class fighter that the guy's trained 3-4 months specifically for. No, it's a whole heap of different problems. But I also knew that Nate Diaz had height and reach, that he could take a great shot, that he had the pace, and that he could rally from behind, and also that he had the great ground game. So looking at it on paper, I was like, all these things make him an interesting matchup for McGregor at the best of times, and this is a last-minute replacement. So I made I think it was a couple of $100 on that. Well, not dollars, pounds. Which I don't think I ever gloated about until now. But there's no point gloating about it. I mean, the only thing that was worth talking about was the fact that the line seemed off, given how dangerous Nate Diaz would be as a last-minute opponent and as a matchup. What you saw there was a lot of McGregor hype, basically. Hello, Jack. Let's talk about counterpunching. Specifically, in an orthodox versus southpaw matchup, I like to spar southpaw and hand fight, throwing my left cross over the shoulder as they throw the right straight. Okay, I'm with you. I am, however, finding that a bit one-tone, and I spend most of the round waiting for them to let go their right hand. Please, can you let me know if there are any other counterpunches you think are useful from this stance matchup? Also, any other techniques you really like for this stance matchup? Thanks, from Josh. Yeah, isn't that the one that Thai guy was using against Deckers? Love that. It's also how Shogun knocked out Machida. Fantastic. The cross counter over the rear straight is a very slick punch for a southpaw. I mean, other things you can be looking for are the left straight while slipping to the elbow side of the jab. Or you can encourage that by letting your lead hand glide out of the way slightly when you're hand fighting. If you keep someone's hand under pressure and then you let it go, it's going to be like a bubble underwater. It'll just go straight to the target. So you can sort of encourage that one to come out. Technique I really like, sort of lead into counter, is, I love front kicks anyway, but front kick with your rear leg and put it down at 45 degrees behind you so that you're almost doing a sidestep backwards. And if you can do that and make sure your hips and shoulders, make sure that your hips move with it and your back stays sort of straight so that your shoulders are over your hips, and you try and throw the left hand over the opponent's right as they come back after you. You're not going to be able to control what they throw back at you, but it's the act of them following you that will open them up to a counter, hopefully. This is one that Schilt used to do with his lead leg. If you put that front kick down behind you and angle out as you're doing it, you can create a slightly different angle and throw your straight in from sort of like a 45-30 degree angle. It's a fun one to play with. It relies on you being able to do a bit more upright stuff. You need to be able to be happy standing upright because it's your feet that are going to take your head offline, not moving your head itself. But that one's a fun one to play with. And of course, just dig in left front kicks and look for the Brazilian kick with the left leg. That's the sort of stuff that makes guys reluctant to stand there while you're doing it, and that's the stuff that opens up the counterpunching game. As long as you're remembering the counters while you're trying to, you got to be in the mood to like throw out the leads while waiting for your opportunity to counter. A lot of guys look for the counter, give up, start leading, and then get hit with the counter. So that's the hardest part of sparring in any sport, like whether it's a grappling sport or a striking sport. If you go into it like trying to anticipate your opponent's will and counter it, and then you go, oh, I'm bored of this, I'm going to impose my will, and you forget entirely about your opponent's will. It's trying to keep it a back and forth relationship where you're building off what the other guy gives you, as opposed to just thinking about only you and there being like a heavy bag in front of you. I hope that helps. Hijack, I've loved the segments on book recommendations you've done, and I assume that you have amassed a fairly large library, so I was wondering if there are any oddities or off-the-beaten-path fight books that you might recommend. Best from Karen. We'll do some weird ones, actually. I got one the other day. I can't even remember what it's called. It's called, like, Secret Fighting Arts Around the World. And it's so clearly just made up. It's this guy going out to places and learning, like, the Ganges groin gouge and shit like that. Anything by Don Draper. Yeah, it's Don Drager from... whichever one isn't the guy from Mad Men. His books are good, from back in the day. There's a really interesting one by a guy called Ronald Lindsay, who was an American serviceman in Okinawa, and got to train with a guy called Hohen Soken, who I think I've mentioned before on the podcast. Basically, he was like a farmer who was taught by one of the Matsumuras, very old school, like Okinawan karate lineage. And when they made the Okinawan, whatever it was, Tode, Te, Karate, whatever they were calling it at the time, when they made their federation and started giving out grades, this guy was given like a 9th dan, and people were like, I've never heard of this guy, because he was just a bumpkin from the country. But Lindsay trained with him, and just a really interesting sort of like personal memoir history thing with like remarks on applications of old school forms as taught by this farmer. So there's some really interesting ones, like kneel down, grab some sand, throw it in their eyes. Some of the more interesting ones are things like trying to beat the inside, taking the inside line of a sort of arcing punch or a haymaker or something like that, shooting straight in and keeping the fingers open and going to the eyes. So, linear punches beating circular punches but aiming for the eyes. It's just interesting because all the stuff he seemed to learn from Hohen Soken is really to the point, grisly, effective stuff. And you're like, well, I appreciate the simplicity of that. I'm not really giving it like a proper build-up, but it's a decent book. If you know anything about, well, actually, even if you don't know anything about like karate from that part of Okinawa, worth a read. I like a book called Total Aikido by whatever his name is, Gozo. Really glossy, well put together book. It's like the best textbook on Aikido. And I use it to reference stuff when I see like an Aikido technique in a movie. I'm like, what's that called again? And some of the ideas in there, Total Aikido sounds like what I'd call something that was bullshit. But there are some interesting ideas in there about creating movement and using, forcing the opponent to take steps in order to counteract that. And those are the sort of things that I personally have built my BJJ game around. Things like, a really simple example would be like the hip bump. Hip bump sweep from closed guard, especially if you do it like BJ Penn style, where you properly sit up into them with the forearm across the throat. It's a way of generating power and forcing the opponent to do something. They have to put their hand out to base. And while you almost never will hip bump sweep someone, you have found a way of generating enough force to make them do something, and then you can build off that, like a hip bump into a triangle choke, or a hip bump into catching the posted arm in an overhook, or the Williams guard or something like that. And that's what you're looking for in any situation. It's any disadvantageous situation on the bottom. You're looking for what's the best way that I can generate some power to make him do something, and then you can work on responses to their response, or their most predictable response. So Total Aikido is a fun enough book, and it does make you want to go, can I try this on you? To like anyone who, well, mainly my wife, but anyone who's around, I'm just like, can I try this on you? And they'll go, ow, and then they'll go, but I don't think you could do that if I was actually trying to not let you do that. Nesta Capoeira's books are great. I mean, I plugged this, I think it was an article the other week. I said I bought Nesta Capoeira's Little Book of Capoeira for literally a penny, and postage. And it's a brilliant book. It's mainly a history book, but it's by a guy who was a real important figure in the capoeira community, and he lays out like the basic patterns that I can't remember which style of capoeira it is. Was it Angola and something or other? But that's an interesting one. Banned from Boxing by Kirk Lawson is a great one, which you can get through his Lulu page. A little bit about old school Jack Slack in there, and tons of other interesting things about old school throws and trips during boxing's bare knuckle era. I always hype up The Heart of Karate Do. That's a book by Shigeru Igami, who went very sort of cult and weird towards the end of his life. But he estimated he took about 10,000 punches on his abdomen trying to find like the best punch, and he thought that the boxers had the best punch, and then he started punching with Nakadaka Ippon Ken, or Nakadaka Ken, which is the middle single knuckle fist, and you can win pretty much anyone with that, like very little effort with no glove. And so he believed that was the best sort of punch. But it's one of those books where you're reading it and you're going, God, I agree with everything this guy says. And then you look at the pictures of the people he actually taught, and it's completely different to how you imagined it. So it shows the difference between principle and mechanical. The principles are all sound, but the mechanical looks really weird. And you could use just the principles and make something that looked completely different. Billy Robinson's autobiography is absolutely brilliant. Read that one. Angry White Pajamas is the classic. Another one about Aikido, actually, but more of a memoir. I like Moving Zen, which I mentioned, actually probably months ago, but that's a whole genre of book. The Westerner goes to Japan and learns martial arts. I could write one, actually. But yeah, that's a fun one. Death in the Afternoon is always a fun one. It's about bullfighting, but it has crossovers with martial arts thinking. Shotokan's Secret is another one that I always hype up for being like one guy's conspiracy theory, but it's very compellingly told. Right, that'll do us some questions for this week. Let's talk about the upcoming Bellator card. Only joking. No, we're not going to be talking about that. It doesn't look very interesting at all. But what about that UFC 209 though, eh? Right, I'm going to head off. Sign up to Patreon. We got a Jack Dempsey episode inbound. I'm just waiting on my paper copy of Championship Fighting. I know, isn't that crazy? I've only ever had digital copies, and I decided to splash out and get myself a physical copy to annotate and stuff. So that'll be finished quite soon, depending on their shipping. And send your mail to fightsgoneby@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast, and I'll catch you next week, hopefully after the best event of the year so far, because it's been a bit of a slow one up to this point.
Connor bless.